Working Class Heroes Convention. My name is Jim Carroll, and I'll be chairing this panel and the other panels this weekend. This is the management panel, and as Jim Lawless just said to me, as we kind of had a great difficulty getting our managers together to walk from just where the bar is there to here. It's a bad omen when you can't get managers together like that. So hopefully this panel will be we'll be able to solve that problem. Anyway, the general kind of suppose overriding theme of Convention 2012 is 10 years on. What have we learned? As you know from all the kind of posters and I suppose all the bump around this year's Hard Working Class Heroes, they're marking 10 years in business. It's a long way from 2003 when it started in the Project Arts Centre just down on East Essex Street as a much smaller affair. There wasn't an industry side to it, and it's grown hugely in that time. And I suppose kind of what we're looking back at is kind of like, the 10 years of bands, many of them are no longer with us, as it would naturally be the case. Bands don't last forever. And what's happened in the meantime, how the industry has grown, how the Irish industry has grown. And I suppose kind of like picking out some teams from that 10 years to revisit. We've done a lot of kind of panels over that 10 years, and I suppose we've picked some of the big kind of the bigger teams to kind of go back to. And we're going to start, I suppose, today with the managers panel. And basically, like the question I suppose now is like, what does a manager do in 2012? But the question, sorry, isn't what does a manager do in 2012? What does a manager not do? I mean, it seems to be that they're the A&R man, the tour manager, the agent, the business person, the bookkeeper, and the person who'll deal with the bass player when he's broken up with his or her boyfriend at 3 a.m. in the morning. So it's kind of like what we've done is we've gathered together 4 great managers, 4 very, very busy managers to kind of talk about some ideas and issues around that. So I'm just going to start by basically asking each one of them, starting at the end with Jeffrey, to introduce themselves and maybe just say a little bit about who they work with and what they do.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Remedios. I own and run a company called Arts and Crafts. I'm based in Toronto. That's where our main office is, and we have offices in Los Angeles and Mexico City. And we work primarily as an artist services group. So we work to help artists connect with their fans and potential fans. We try to work with interesting, authentic music that we think is going to age well. And our promise to our artists is that we'll put the same care and attention into the business of their music as we feel the artists we work with put into its creation. So we do that manifested in a number of ways, as a label, as a publisher, creating platforms like festivals and showcase series, and as artist managers. So I personally frontline manage 2 clients, Broken Social Scene and Timber Timbre, and then some of my team, we have a team of 4 other managers who manage about another dozen artists, principally Canadians at this point, including folks like Dan Mangan, Jason Collette, Zeus, and goes from there. Hi.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Joe?
Hi, my name is Joe Clark. I'm from my company is called CWB. Primarily, we manage the Rubber Bandits. Then we work with a range of other acts like the Stripes, Mud and Cahoots, and a number of other acts. In a much more, I would say, beginner way than what Jim just mentioned there. That's what we will be looking at doing, is building to become an artist services group, where rather than needing to manage all acts, some acts don't need full management service, they just need services. It's something that we're moving towards and building up quite a big client base based around that. That's pretty much me.
Cool. Bernadette?
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. My name is Bernadette Barrett. I'm from Dublin, but I've been in London for about 15 years, and I work for a company called Mondo Management. We look after David Gray, Damien Rice, Orbital, Lisa Hannigan, and a number of other sort of developing artists that we're just starting to work on to, every aspect of their career, really. We are acting as label services for a few of our artists, and indeed publisher, tour manager, whatever else needs to be done, websites, merchandise, etc., etc. So that's it, really.
Thank you. Jim?
My name's Jim Lawless. I manage the Coronas and a band called The Danger Is with another guy called Alan Cullivan. Basically, I fell into the industry, never really planned to get into the music industry at all, just happened to hang around with a bunch of talented mates, and have been lucky enough to be here still 5 years later, actually this year, believe it or not. So, and basically I work very closely with our label, both here in the UK, and basically just kind of, as you say, do anything and everything that needs to be done.
You're very modest, Jim. I've heard you say that so many times. It was just a bunch of friends and I looked out,
Well, that's what happened. Like, I don't want to be saying that because sometimes I feel bad and I meet people who you know, they go to college, like, yeah, I want, you know, from young, they're like, I want to manage bands, I want to do this, I want to do that, you know, and they're just maybe never come across a band that maybe can quite do it, or for whatever reason. So I kind of feel bad sometimes when I meet people like that. But I've been lucky enough that I've been able to, you know, we've all been together to be able to do what we've done.
Cool. Okay, just a bit of housekeeping before we start. We're going to yak up here for about, like I said, until about 2:45, 10 to 3, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor. The panel has been filmed as well, and it, like all the panels and all the sessions this weekend, will be available on the Hard Working Class website after the event, which is hwch.net. When you started out managing, first of all, Bernadette, what did you expect? I mean, did you like, when you headed off to London and started working with Mondo and started working with David Gray and Orbital, did you set things in your mind about what management was all about? And has that turned out to be a case, or has it been a bigger nightmare or a bigger dream?
Living the dream, Jim. No, I mean, it's a strange one because it's developed so much since when I started even, because I was a promoter in Ireland, so I sort of had an idea of the live side of things. And when I went to work with Rob in London, I was very much based on the day-to-day with David Gray, and at the time, it was just the biggest, steepest learning curve any of us had ever had, because none of us had a clue what we were doing, really. But it was just fun, and you live and learned, but that was, you know, it was a very different time. It's 12 years ago. And I think just the nature of the business has changed so much since then. It's an ever-evolving beast. And, you know, at that time, it was very much managing a team of people. At a label, at the agency, different promoters around the world. And, you know, we're now a lot of those people and fulfilling a lot of those roles. So it was very good to see it from the other side. It's almost like I did my training as a chef. And whilst I was a chef, you get to do a stint as a waitress. And it was almost interesting to see both sides. From that point of view, it makes you more empathetic to the jobs that people have to do. So I think having a general overall view is really helpful and invaluable to understanding what everybody's roles are and how you pull them all together.
Jeffrey, I mean, Jim was talking there about the fact that he ends up in management by being friends with the band he's now managing. How did you end up in the situation you're in? What were you doing before Arts and Crafts was established?
Yeah, it was a very similar situation. I actually come from the record side, and I'd worked for major labels for many years. And, you know, got to a point where I went, okay, you know what, there's an amazing community of musicians in Toronto that I was really good friends with. For lack of a better way to put it, I felt like I wanted to be paid to think a little more. And, you know, I sort of felt like I might get laid off in 6 months, or might get laid off in 6 years, or I might run this company and have to lay off my friends. But in any which case, there was sort of this downward pressure. And I felt like from the independent perspective, could be the right place to operate. I was really good friends with the guys in Broken Social Scene. And so I pitched them, Kevin Drew, the principal in Broken particularly, and said, look, I have kind of this crazy idea about like a modern music company where we try to throw out all the old contracts and just partner. And we'd partner in all revenue sources and build from there. And then as we needed to kind of add on different pieces, we'd add on. Next year will be 10 years since that happened. And over that time, we've evolved and developed some more formal structures. So we'll work traditionally as managers with some artists and traditionally as a label with some others. But it really started from this ethos of we want to be a partner to the artists to help them connect with fans or potential fans.
When you hear Joe, when you hear Jeffrey talk about that, the fact that, like, I mean, they threw out the old rules, they partnered with artists and all that. Given your experience, say, with rubber bands and the other artists you work with, like the Stripes and all that, you know, is it hard to do? Is it hard to kind of like start afresh like that? To actually rethink the industry in that kind of way, especially here in Ireland, where everything seems to be a little bit more conservative, a bit more kind of like rigorous.
No, well, I think it's the only model that can work. Is you're either the classic U2 model, you're the fifth member of the band, or you just partner along on everything that happens. Rubber Bandits wise, a bit similarly, I would have been a fan and I would have known the guys in Limerick, and then it grew and it grew and grew and grew, and now it's where we're moving sideways into TV production and we're moving into all these other things. So there is a huge amount of being paid to learn, I think, and especially we only work with bands that we really, really like. And that's a huge bonus, and that, you know, makes up for a lot of those 3 a.m. girlfriend phone calls and all of that, you know, is that, you know, just occasionally, and not as much as when you started off first, but you get that shiver, you get that tingle when you're watching them do something, you know. And, you know, likewise with the Stripes, it would be like with a scenario last week when you're dealing with a band whose band members are all 15, where one of them, their parents gets a letter saying they've missed all the days off they can miss for the year in school on the 1st of October. and you have things like a movie premiere that they've been asked to do in London next Wednesday, and a US tour and all that, and like these are real world problems you have to deal with.
How do you deal with that? How do you deal with like? Is the parent understanding enough to kind of realize, okay, well, this is a good opportunity, or is it a case of the parent is kind of going like, you're never to call Joe Clark ever again?
No, but like this is where the management of it comes in. So this is where you sit down and you go, right, well, obviously we're going to need to recognize this and deal with it. So you go, let's try and book as much of it. You have to be able to turn, as much of it is about turning down opportunities and knowing that another one will come along, and being able to, or even stand there, can we get a 6 o'clock flight and get them out of London? You just have to problem solve as you go along. But really the big thing has been, from the learning curve for me in the last couple of years with the Bandits, has been able to learn to plan medium to long term. I would come from a promoter, venue manager kind of background, where the gig or the month is the end of the story. It's like, what's your bottom line at the end of the month? How did the gig do? Whatever. Whereas with an artist, it's just all much further out. It just takes much longer. Things that look like minuses end up being pluses at the end of the year, and it's definitely not about the money. It's about the other stuff that happens that makes it good.
Let's just take it back to the very start, Jim. I want to throw this question at you. At what stage does a band realise they need a manager?
I suppose it depends on the band. Like, you'll see some people, and even like I did some of the speed sessions here this morning, and some of them have it incredibly together, and it's pretty impressive. We were talking about that at lunch. And then there's another time then when you see people and you can see this raw talent, and you can see there's something there, but they can't tie their shoelaces. So it kind of depends. It depends on the artist, but I think it will kind of, I think Bernadette mentioned it earlier on, it kind of naturally comes together. What happens is, a manager will almost find you, is what I think you said, wasn't it? And it's like, there'll be something that a manager will see and go, yeah, I think I can work with that. I think I can help it along, and I want to. And it is like, I want to be part of it. I want to be a partner with it. And it's that kind of teaming up. I think it's very hard to actually say, right, I need a manager now because I've done this and I've done that and I've done that. Because it doesn't really work like that. And I think if you try and go after it that way, you're going to get the wrong manager. I think it really has to be just an organic thing to where someone comes along and goes, you know what, guys, love what you're doing, and I think I can help. And then hopefully the band go, actually, we've seen you at a couple of gigs, kind of were hoping you might say something, and it can kind of go from there. But there's no one point. There's no one point. It's just a thing that happens.
Yeah. You talked earlier on, Bernard, about the acts you're working with. You were kind of going on the fact that you're now doing all these different things to me. You mentioned tour managing, merchandise, websiting. Have you kind of found that, did you have to upskill yourself as well as the years gone by? So have you kind of found you've had to add to your skill set during,
No, absolutely. I mean, it's enormously, that's what I was saying earlier on about working on the other side, from understanding what people do. Yeah, I mean, I had no idea what an ISRC code was 10 years ago. In fact, when anybody at a major label that I rang to say what's an ISRC code, they were like, I don't know. So it's like all of us have had to learn all of these languages and how, taking things away from sort of mass market, going direct to fan, and just reinventing business models, really. And I think it's really important to realise that we're now all our own little businesses, so you've got to become little business managers and little entrepreneurs. And, the whole music business is only made up of a series of other small businesses now, as far as I see it. So we become your own little self-contained unit. And then, hopefully, at some point, you grow and grow until you just involve more people.
This is for all of you. I mean, feel free to jump in on this one. As the industry has changed over the last 10 years, obviously there's more and more work for the manager to do. You haven't got the record label anymore giving you kind of like wads of kind of tour support. You haven't had the record label kind of like doing the work record labels traditionally have done. So there's more and more work falling on your shoulders. Are you finding you're getting paid more for it?
No.
Or would you like this? This thing. I'm kind of curious about this because I mean you're all kind of like doing a lot more work than if we hit this panel 10 years ago, for example, we'd have a couple of managers up here, and all they would do was manage the acts in the traditional sense. Everything else would be handed on to other people. Now the manager seems to be doing everything, and you're the person controlling the kind of the A team around the band. So like, does the artist realize this, and two, does the artist appreciate it? I know the answer is the second question, so don't try and lie. The artist appreciates nothing.
Well, something goes right, it's down to the artist. If it goes wrong, it's down to the manager. But the manager can no longer say it's the label's fault, because all the managers are now the label. So yeah, I mean, I understand why the slightly older school would say that it's actually a conflict to be either the artist agent or label as well as manager. But you know, if we don't start things happening, then I think they're unlikely to ever get going in this day and age. If you're waiting to be signed by a label, you might find your wait a little bit longer than you would have. But yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely, without putting too fine a point on it, I think we're all playing the long game, where we as managers can only take on a certain few acts every year, and you really, really have to believe that that act is prepared to work hard for the next 10 years. And at some point then you might see a return. But if it's an overnight success you're after, it's the wrong business.
I think it's just the reality of it. You know, if you believe in a band and you want them to do well, you have to do those jobs, and because no one else will, and it's just the reality of it. And if this was 10 years ago, you'd probably be lucky to get a managers panel, because we'd be on an island somewhere, you know, because the traditional thing of a manager, and I remember when I was getting into it, is like, oh, you must be the dodgy one, you know, and you must be the, you know, you must be that, and that kind of Ian Faith sort of perception of a manager. And from talking to people in the Music Managers Forum abroad, and guys who've been working in the industry as managers for like 30, 40 years, some of the stories they have are kind of frightening. I think kind of a bit scary when you actually realise, geez, you got away with that, and you could do this, and you could do that. And I was like, wow.
I think just the general hardship of the music industry in general has, by its nature, ended up cleaning up the image of promoters, agents, everyone else. You know, the whole maybe not.
The image of agents is cleaned up. Wow.
But you know, there was this scenario 10 or 12 years. There was a touch in things. You know, there was like, you did a gig, you got a big touch, and it did really well. Now you just got to do enough gigs to make sure that you meet the wage bill at the end of the week. And likewise, with being a manager, your job is to make sure that the act can eat at the end of the month, and that you have enough money to put into the next video, and you're constantly juggling all that stuff around. Whereas I think, yeah, maybe 20 years ago there was all that stuff. There was the famous hip hop manager Suge Knight, is it, or the guy who used to hang the artists out the window by their ankles, and
Peter Branch,
until they sign the deals. You know, it's all that going on. Now you don't want them to sign deals. You just want them to, you know, make sure they show up and rehearse. And I think there's very much now, there's a contract between the management and the band of almost behavior and what everyone will do and how hard everyone will work. Yeah. And I think that's down to the act as much as it's down to the manager, that they need to rehearse, they need to come up with new songs, they need to, and if that's not there, then it doesn't matter how much work the manager does, and it doesn't matter how talented the band is, unless they really work it. You know, and they're on their Facebook and they're doing all the things that you want them to do, where they're interacting with everyone. Then there's just no point.
That's a very interesting point as well, like Joe, because I've seen a kickback from some bands about this. You know, I've seen a kickback from bands who kind of like resent the fact they've got to do that work. Resent that there's a post on Louder Than War at the moment about bands kicking up by the fact they have to kind of fund it themselves. You know, going down that route. Is that a no-no for managers? And that's something you're kind of looking from the start. That an act is self-sufficient, is going to do the work. That like, or is it the case that acts think still that they can load everything off to use?
I don't see why it's any different from any other business. You know what I mean? It's the exact same, and you're effectively just managing a business. You're managing cash flow, as you say. You know, you're getting finance. You're making sure there's overdrafts in place. You're making all the stuff that can bridge, you know, you between doing a tour, meaning that you don't have to do too many gigs to where it's actually detrimental. Because music, it's not like a normal business. If I have paper clips, I sell paper clips, for example. I have a factory in Germany and I pump them out. And paper clips are paper clips, and I advertise my paper clips, and I say they're better than his paper clips, and people buy paper clips. That's it. Music isn't the same as that. The more you push a band, the more people go, oh, hang on a second, how come they're kind of everywhere all of a sudden? No, I don't like that. So it's almost counterintuitive, I think, as a business. You almost have to take a step back to take a step forward. But then financially, that's a nightmare. Because you can't be gigging, and that's where like publishing and stuff comes in to try and, you know, where you can have your music working, but you don't have to, and all this sort of stuff. It's just like any other business. It boggles me the way people think it's not. Yeah. And kind of annoys me a little as well.
I can tell that. Jeffrey, I want to kind of ask a short question at you, just something that Bernadette was kind of saying there, you know, about the fact that every year a management roster will add on more acts, and they have to kind of keep it management. In the case of Mondo Management, you've got about 6 acts, I'd say, 6 faves?
I think we've a total of
9 acts,
now,
right?
but
Is it-
at various different stages.
Yeah,
of
it's a
development.
small enough operation.
There's
You know,
only 3 of us work there.
3 of you in
so
office.
you can only do so much.
like arts and crafts has a huge roster of acts. You know, how many people do you employ to keep on top of that? Is it hard? And also, how much of a factor is the fact that you're located in Canada and you've got access to all these amazing grants that we can only drool over from here. You know.
Well, we were just a team of 1 or 2, and then we signed this band called the Paperclips, and now we're
I want in.
we're around 20 in Toronto, and then we have 1 person in Los Angeles, and then we've got a totally separate, standalone office in Mexico City with another 10 people. And various people do different things. Everyone kind of works towards the middle, and everyone's involved on everything, but there's sort of different specializations as we go. So for Canadian artists, there's a lot of support from our government, and we have a lot of private support that's developed and brought forth because of certain government kind of legislations, and that's incredibly helpful because it allows artists to grow and tour and develop without the same pressures that you would if you're having to do everything with 100% dollars. When you're spending 50-cent dollars or 33-cent dollars, you can do more. I mean, it allows a company like ours to punch above our weight. But the best way I've heard this described in terms of funding support is it's not a replacement for hard work, and it's not a replacement for talent. It's an incubator. It's not an oxygen tank. But it's great to have that kind of development and support when you're trying to grow.
I remember we were talking on the way up here. Like I interviewed you in Toronto a couple of years ago. You know, I remember you said something very interesting at the time. You said being based in Toronto was great because within a couple of hours drive of Toronto, you'd see so many cities in the kind of like the northeast corner of the states as well. You know, how much of a factor do you reckon the fact that it's been based in Canada, based in Toronto, and established yourself over the last 10 years when Toronto was very, very hot in terms of bands, has played in arts and crafts, been in its build?
Yeah, I mean, we've got. It's hard to say because it's a bit too soon to kind of look back and write the memoir. But I've often said, like, if anyone's starting a company, I recommend they start it with Broken Social Scene, because from that band we got to work with Feist and Stars and Jason Collette and Apostle of Hustle and kind of all these amazing acts. I think it's a testament to the culture there and to the grant system that it's become this incredibly fertile ground for artists to kind of grow and develop. I mean, that doesn't mean that we exclusively work with Canadian artists. We'll work with people from all over the world, but it's created a platform that's been really amazing and positive for us to grow from.
Yeah, that idea as well, like, you know, that Jeffrey's just been talking about the rest of you, you know, in terms of fundraising, and fundraising being such an important part of kind of like being able to pay the wages, making sure the band can actually eat. When you started out in management at the start, had you realised that fundraising would be such an important part of what you do, or was it the case that you quickly realised, oh, hang on a second, you know, if there's no contracts, if there's no rec contracts anymore, we've got to go and find the money somewhere else?
I think when you start out, generally, everyone's got something else going on, or it's a part-time thing. And it's the day you kind of dawns on everyone that, okay, everybody needs to make their living now from this band. That's when it starts getting difficult, because all of a sudden there's this immediate drag on every single week and every single gig that you do that wasn't there before. That's when it gets difficult. That's when you need to try and put that together, and that's when you have to become a grown-up about it. Yeah. And a lot of the fun from the management side goes out of it then at that point, because, you know, it's not anymore we got to pay the van driver and we got to do this. All of a sudden that's there. It's like getting a mortgage. You know, it's the exact same level of drag. Yeah, it's.
Like, I mean, in two of your cases, you know, I mean, that idea of kind of like, I mean, say for example, Bernadette Edmondo, right? I mean, there's been your artist, there's a mix there. I mean, David Gray had a major deal for a while, then he went independent, and he was hugely successful independent, then he went back onto a major. Lisa Hannigan has done her own thing. Orbital have been and gone, you know. Like, have you found over the years that, like, I mean, you're finding new kind of fundraising models all the time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, well, there's sort of artist direct funding things. I believe Funded.ie, which I'd never heard about until today, I'm afraid. And Pledge and Kickstarter and all those kind of things are coming into where artists can take a little more control about direct to fan base, which I think is really good. But yeah, for us, it's literally trying to get a publishing deal or trying to get somebody to give you an advance or somebody to give you a lend of some money so you can set up the next bit, to set up the next bit, to set up the next bit. But it's a constant reinvestment.
Yeah.
And again, it's the long game. It's the 7 to 10 year plan.
Yeah.
It just has to be.
That's exactly it. Like it's, you know, the money you earn today ends up going. I mean, you could take a short-term view on it, and you could, you know, gig around for 2 or 3 years and earn some really good money. But the problem is, you'll only then have a career of 2 or 3 years. You really need to be taking what you're doing today and putting it into till tomorrow, and then. But you know, don't be afraid of using traditional models either. You know, I mean, we're lucky we have a very good relationship with our bank. And we're musicians, and I remember people going, "Oh, geez, you'll never get this, you'll never get that." But if you put a coherent plan together, and now obviously we were lucky to where we were in college when we started off, so we didn't have any of the pressures of you know, responsibilities or anything like that, and we just went out and gigged, and we got to a point where we had actually a bit of a fan base to where we could start to gig around and do things like that. So we did have a little bit of a jump start on that, but still put together, you know, a business proposal, went into a bank manager, and they were lucky enough to believe in us and go ahead, and we still have a relationship with them today. So that, you know, don't be afraid of those sorts of models either, you know, because the funded thing and all, I think, is good, and it's great, it's clever, but I think you have to be a little bit careful with it, because you're making a contract with your fans, you know what I mean? And if you don't live up to that contract, they've given you money for it. You better, you know, I think there's almost more pressure with that than I think with something traditional. So I think you have to be kind of careful on those terms, but it's wherever you can get it.
Are you find that the bands are a lot more, I suppose, kind of amenable to the funded yourself approaches, or are they being suspicious about it, or do they actually know about it? Let's be quite honest.
I don't know. We've never done one, so I know they're aware of it, but we haven't focused on it or anything like that anyway.
I'm only going based on the level of people that I've met today at the one-on-one sessions, which I was really impressed by, how a lot of people had brought themselves to a point where they'd finished records, and a lot of people using those kind of models. Yeah, I think it's very encouraging. But yeah, it's a big responsibility.
Yeah. Another area, and this is going to come up in the panel that's going to happen after this, is kind of the whole situation, the whole relationship right now between bands and brands, and how much that has changed. As managers, you know, when you see a brand, be it Absolute, or be it Red Bull or whatever, coming wants to talk to you about your artist, is it the case? Is there a couple of different reactions in your head? On one hand, is great, there's money here. Or is it a case of what do they want exactly? And like it's how do you kind of like square that one off? You know, between like sometimes the brand is looking for almost like a contract with the band on as onerous terms as an old record contract.
I think it's not right to paint all brands with the same brush, the way you can't paint all bands with the same brush. And I think that brands are there, and they're an opportunity for artists to use them. Very early on in our career, Broken Social Scene got approached by Hummer, wanting to use one of their songs in a commercial, and they offered us a boatload of money. I mean, at the time, for us as broke musicians in a start-off company, it was a boatload of money. And it was like, God, what the fuck do we do? You know, post-militaristic vehicle, gas-guzzling, world-destroying, tons of cash.
What did you do?
Well, we had a long discussion about it, and the band came up with this. They said, look, our answer is no. We cannot give our music to support that brand. But please do not mistake our artistic integrity for the fact that we don't all love money. And I think that was a good point. And that's sort of something that we've tried to remember and tried to be a part of how we work all the way along. I mean, look, everyone's here because you want to do more than just make music. You want to make money making music. And so that immediately puts you on this spectrum, right? And sort of on the far left, you've got kind of pure art, where you take no money for music and you just make it. And you can do whatever you want when you do that. And on the far right, you've got kind of pure entertainment, and it's all about driving money. The moment you choose to have somebody pay you anything for music, you're somewhere on that line. And so it's about kind of feeling the artist, like for us as managers, what is this artist's comfort level on that line? Where do they sit? Like on the record side, we had a situation where we got offered this massive, a ton of syncs were coming in for Feist. And you know, none of them felt right. Ultimately, it was all up to her, and you know, she said no to most of them. And then, you know, this one came in that was not as much money, but it was the right fit, and that was the Apple iPod with video that came out, and they used her in the commercial, and that like really took her from like one level of success to another level of success. And so it was really kind of using the brand in a real partnership, symbiotic kind of a way.
I think that's right. It is a matter of just finding what's right and what's comfortable for both, you know, you as a manager, and not, you know, obviously coming to your band with a ridiculous brand that obviously doesn't fit. But, you know, being able to be selective and go, no, well, you know, what they're about, yeah, that's cool, that kind of suits them, and you can kind of come to them and say, look, this is what's on offer. And it is managing expectations on both sides, both then money and saying, well, look, we obviously can't run around wearing your T-shirt, and but you know, but we can do this, that, and the other. And it's like everything else. It's like even a deal with a promoter. It's a compromise. You know, you both figure out what you're happy with, and if you're comfortable, you go with it.
Or then you take, on the other hand, somebody like Jose Gonzalez, who was broken through the medium of branding, you know, and then there's no damage in that. Nobody knew who he was. So
I really like your line about that spectrum, Jeffrey. I mean, I'm definitely going to borrow that line. It perfectly sums up a lot of people's reaction, or I suppose response to what music business is all about. Just going on in terms of managing expectations, you know, have any of you dealt with situations whereby an artist is, you know, it's happening for an artist is kind of hot, they're taking off, and the artist starts getting cold feet. The artist kind of like, I mean, I'm not just looking at you, Bernadette, but like the artist kind of like begins to get wary about what success means. You know, I'm hearing, there's a couple of cases I'm hearing recently where there's an artist who are like, they've been kind of established for quite some time, everything's going fine, and they've hit the sweet spot. They've got an album that's going through the roof, the tours are saying like bejesus, and it's all go, but the artist is having cold feet. How do you deal with something like that? That's a bit of it.
I mean, that's like a,
that you've just dodged.
That's like an amazing situation to have happen. You know, and every artist is different. Every artist is unique. But you know, there's like with us, there's this kind of place we always try to get to with artists. It's like when you're working with a young band, everything is about outreach. Everything is about us going out into the world. And so it's you're kicking, you're clawing, you're scratching for anything and everything you can get. But when you start to get that stuff, the paradigm has to shift. And so if your artist is feeling like that, then that's either your cue as a manager that you haven't got there quite yet, or it's your cue to start changing your approach and starting to be a lot more strategic and a lot less about everything, and starting to go, okay, now we can really, truly dictate the story. And so it's fine if an artist gets cold feet, but then the job as a manager is to manage their expectation. It's like, it's fine, life is long, and if an artist wants to not go into the fast lane, like a career doesn't have to be a rocket ship. If some artists just want to climb the ladder and kind of not break rungs as they go, I respect that immensely. But check your expectations. Like, don't expect then, like, know the kind of venue sizes you'll play if you've decided to stop doing press. Know the venue sizes if you've decided to like put out a super strange record, and that's fine. Like, you work with artists like for the long term. But it's an expectation management.
I think that's absolutely right, Jeffrey. I think that a lot of, from the artist's point of view, it's helpful if you could be as clear with the manager as to what you want, and often just be careful what you ask for, because sometimes what you get isn't what you think you're going to get. And yeah, I mean, the industry it's a tough old beast, and it can swallow a lot of people up if you're not prepared and if you don't have the right level of people behind you, I think, who support you and who actually listen to you. I think there's a danger of a lot of managers, maybe so in the older days where you had the pressure of a record label telling you what to do or trying to tell you what to do. It was a little more difficult to control something. When it's rolling, it's very difficult to stop it because you can't undo the thing that's happening. So it's just all about managing as you go, I think, and listening to the people who you're representing and whose interests you have in the long-term view.
I think for a manager, it's knowing your artist as well. I think if it happens deep down, I think a manager goes, you could probably see it going to happen. And I think sometimes I find artists as like a bit of an oxymoron. Like, they'll stand on stage, they'll be the most confident person you ever see. And then all of a sudden, they're like, oh, no, I didn't like that, didn't like this, I don't like this, you know. Yeah. And they've got no confidence at all. And I think as a manager, you have to take the belief that you have and then try and almost instill it in them and say, no, you can do this. This is, if you don't want to do that, that's fine. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. And it's as you say, kind of, not mollycoddle, that kind of sounds a bit, a bit condescending, but it's managing expectations but, recognizing that because once you press a button, sometimes it's kind of hard to stop it. And then, you can end up doing more damage down, in the medium term, not so much the long term.
And I think as well, sometimes artists get comfortable with a certain level of success and don't realize that can't be kept up unless they aim a level higher. And they have the fear that, like especially if you have going from Ireland where you're selling out shows to very small shows in other countries, or, that's a huge thing to adjust to. And I think it's an odd one, and I think there's certain before we would engage with anyone that we were interested in managing with, we do it's like a 15-page questionnaire. Basically, it's ridiculously thorough and complicated, and we make people think about all the things. What do they want to be? Where do they see
What kind of
themselves?
questions are on that questionnaire?
It's all this stuff like what is your band? Who do you think your fans are? All of that stuff, and often people haven't even thought about it. We lose like 90% of people who want to talk to us at the very start, and that's great because if they can't think about themselves and where they want to be and what they want to do that much to answer it, then there's no point us trying to understand who they are, Yeah. But the ones who but that's what it is. Time is so precious, and the margins on management are so tight. You can't afford to bring any passengers along. You need your artists to be fully engaged, to know what they want to do. Then you buy into what they want to do. They buy into what you want to do on their behalf, because you do get a scenario, and I've seen it a couple of times, where you have managers who are more ambitious for their act than their act. And that's an awful scenario to be in, because the acts can always walk away with their talent and whatever else, but so it's a lonely life being a manager.
I feel sorry for you. I'll get the violin out. Jeffrey mentioned there about the fact that when an act is starting out, it's all about outreach, trying to make as much noise as possible. And we talked there about managing expectations. When an act gets to a stage where they don't quite want to be playing Crow Park, they want to stay playing in they want to stay playing in the Button Factory. But as you as managers, what do you enjoy about it? What's the most enjoyable aspect of the whole process? When you get up in the morning, if you're like me, you wake up in the morning with a million things to do in your head, and some of them you've kind of marked as red pen. I don't want to do that. What are the things that you enjoy doing?
One thing, just for me, actually, because it only happened to me yesterday morning, is, and as you say, there's a million things in your head, and you're kind of, trying to get things done, and there's not enough time. And then you get an email in from someone who, and in this particular case, it was a young girl, and she had cerebral palsy, and she says, the band that you manage and the music is, got me through some tough times. And it's genuine, and it kind of puts things in perspective, That's pretty cool. When you get something like that, it's kind of nice, you know what I mean? And even though you didn't write the songs, but you still had a little part in helping with that. That's nice.
Bernadette?
It's a tough one, Jimmy. I think it might sound really cliche, but I think just going to see a show and reminding yourself sometimes why you do it, whether it's a band you manage or not. I think often just going to see a show that literally makes your head melt there's nothing like that, really.
Joe?
Yeah, I think it's that thing of it's especially when you've been managing an act for a while. It's like being in any relationship for a long time. You get through stuff, you get stuff done, and then just occasionally something amazing happens where you all share an experience together. So in our case, it would have been, I think, we'd been going to New York and realizing that 800 people would pay to see the Rubber Bandits in America was a huge thing, and it reinvigorated everyone, and it made up for all those nights coming back in a van from Mullingar at 4 o'clock in the morning, and all those things, because you start taking the success and sometimes
A van? I thought you got a horseback from Mullingar.
Yeah, so like that. Having an amazing show with your own act and a bit of what Bernadette said, a bit of what Jim said, and having someone else who is outside of the thing altogether telling you that act's amazing and means something to them. That's about all you got.
Jeffrey, what's the part that keeps you going?
I think about this a lot.
Do you really?
Yeah, right. I can think of a lot of other ways to make a living, and possibly easier ways to make a better living. But I couldn't think of a way that I think would be more rewarding than doing this. And I heard someone say once that like one of the secrets to the happiness of life is do what you love and do it with your friends. And I've sort of taken that approach here, and I think that, you know, it's afforded me that kind of happiness. It's amazing when you believe in something and you put it out there and the world reacts the way you feel it deserves. And you get to be the quarterback of this music that you totally love, right? And so whether it's being a good manager because you're out there in the world and selling your band, or whether you're doing what managers often have to do, which is stand between your artist's gun and your artist's foot. It's rewarding all the way through.
Okay, before we throw it out to the audience, you know, for questions, I suppose it's just kind of two questions. You can choose either answer either one of them, because I mean, I'm sure this question is going to come up on the floor as well. One is, I suppose, like, what advice would you have for new managers? Let's leave the bands aside. We've addressed what bands need to do in order to get your attention, be absolutely stupendous in order to get your attention. But in terms of managers, in terms of like managers starting out, what kind of advice would you give them? And the other question that you can choose to answer is like, what's the most important thing you've learned as a manager in the last 10 years? Seeing as it's all about like looking back on 10 years, what's the most important thing you've learned in the last 10 years? And I'll go down the table from Jim down.
Advice for a manager getting into it. I mean, don't listen to other managers, maybe. In a weird way.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, no, as in, no, because
question
when
I had
people
was
ask me, no, not in a bad way, because when people ask me, like, when someone asks people in the music industry, they're like, don't do it, it's mental. You know, you're not going to earn money, not for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, you're not, and there is a little bit of that, and it could kind of put you off sometimes. But I think just if you're going to be a manager, first of all, you've got a certain mindset. So just go with it, and your gut's often right, and you know, take the advice you think is good.
Yeah.
Ditch the rest.
I suppose a third question you can choose to answer as well. What kind of a role does things like the Music Managers Forum play in your life? I mean, are things like that important? Music Managers Forum being a kind of a lobby group, a trade union, a SIP2 for managers in a way. I mean, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, you're all laughing at that. That must be a good way of describing it. Like, are things like Music Managers Forum, is that important? Is it kind of essential? Is it crucial? Or is it something that is a bit more of a talking shop? So you can choose from 3 questions.
In danger of being slightly hypocritical, because I'm not actually a current member of the MMF, but I do value I think it's a time where a while ago we were all a bit like school children hiding their homework, where nobody would ask anybody what everybody else was doing because you're afraid they'll steal your act or whatever. And now it's a case where everybody is sharing contacts, sharing information, sharing resources. And there's a number of situations where friends of mine who run small labels or PR companies are joining forces. And, I think that's really, really helpful, actually, if you can join with somebody who's compatible and there's a synergy there. I think it's safety in numbers, really. You're more likely to gain. It's very similar to what Jeffrey's company model is, which I think is a brilliant model. The more you can educate, innovate, and create, I think they're the 3 key words where you just have to make yourself aware of everything you can possibly find out, whether you're an artist or a manager. You can never, ever know enough about the business side of things and the artistry side, because they're not as disconnected as you might believe.
I do stuff for the Music Managers Forum, and it genuinely, I was lucky enough to be involved with it from the start here in Ireland, but as a very young manager. And I've learned from the likes of Alan Colvin and meeting guys. I now share an office with Alexis, who runs Delphi, and the amount of stuff that I've learned from those connections and just going for a pint with guys, that's absolutely invaluable for me.
Okay, Joe and Jeffrey, you've got the choice of 3 questions there.
I think in terms of any aspiring manager, I think the very first band you manage, you have to love very, very much, because I think that's where you're going to cut your teeth. That's where all this stuff's going to happen. I think quite possibly, speaking for myself, I possibly would have a lot to learn from someone who's at 20 who started off in management now, because I'm learning stuff constantly, more stuff about Facebook, more stuff about YouTube, more stuff about that stuff all the time, and that's where the music business is moving towards, and that's where all that stuff's happening. I think just to love that first band. After that, you just only have to like them a little bit. But the first one you just gotta love. And so what was the
What's the most important thing you've done in the last 10 years? Oh, and the MMF, the Music Managers Forum. I'm remembering the questions.
I'm say a bit like Bernard. I'm aware of the Music Managers Forum, but I've never participated, just to my own detriment.
Cool.
So,
Jeffrey?
Oh boy.
You
All right.
You can choose one of the three questions, because I'm going to forget all three questions anyway, so.
Okay, let me try to tackle this from another side. We were talking earlier about when do you need a manager as an artist, and I would say that there kind of is a sweet spot as to when you need a manager, and that's the really, like, the kind of acts I want to work with are the kind of acts that are interested in learning the music business, that are willing to help themselves, that are willing to do the work. So you look at your week, you have, I don't know, give or take 100 hours in a week that you could work. So you got to give a little bit of that to a part-time job. You have to do a little bit of that to actually making music. And the rest of the time, you should be doing everything that otherwise a manager would do. So when does a manager come into play? When hopefully the hours you're spending doing non-music stuff is gone, and there is so much music stuff to do that you can't spend time on the music business stuff. That's the right time for you to get a manager. People talk about how it's the best way to get a manager, and it's a paradox. Like, and manager will be interested if another manager is interested. And how is that going to happen? Because you've done those first things. So then who do you have to manage you, and what's the best kind of manager to have? And it comes down to the idea that nobody, us included, will ever give as much a shit about your band as you do. And so you need to find the person that gives almost as much a shit. And that's often a best friend or a family member, and there's amazing legendary examples of big, powerful managers that started by managing their brother or their best friend. And so that first manager, you have to love the act. You couldn't be more right. And you need to put the time in, and you want to be able to learn. And what an amazing time, because now you can learn anything. Everyone's available to everyone, and all the information is out there for everyone. And all of those former gates that kept people out, they're almost all gone. The downside of that is that anyone can do it, so everyone is doing it. So now you actually have to really be good. But that's an opportunity for everybody. And so you start off by having energy and enthusiasm and just willing to be killed for your band and make no money. And while you do that, you build up two key things. You build up experience and you build up contacts. And so then as you go along, you have more experience and more contacts, then you can trade on those a little more, as opposed to just doing it with pure brute force.
It'd be missing me not to ask him a question. What's going on with Broken Social Team at the moment?
They are all around. They're all working on stuff. We'll see.
Very pure, friendly answer. Okay, I'm going to throw it out to the audience. If you've got a question, we'll get a microphone to you. Just raise your hand. And if we've got no questions, that's brilliant. We have a question. It's amazing when you say that. Whenever you say that, I've noticed at panel discussions, there's no question to the floor. Immediately a question comes.
Hello.
Hi, Alexis.
Hi there. I run the stationery R&D in Jim's office, by the way. I wanted to ask, because you all talked about cash flow and how important it is, and you're all at the heart of that for your artists. And I know they're all different, but in broad terms, because I know you won't want to tell us all the details, which sources of revenue keep the wheels on the wagon for you and your bands these days, and which sources are kind of marginal because they're either sources that would potentially always have been marginal, or sources which have become less?
For us in our acts, the key goal number one is get to a place where you can tour profitably. Once you can hit that, then you can start to make a living. Then it's about expanding the markets upon which you can tour profitably. Then as that grows, you put more money in, and that really is at the heart of it. Records can be a loss leader now. Then on the record side, licensing and publishing will really help. Merchandise will help a little bit, but it's driven by getting to a place where you can tour and make money for us.
Yeah, I think without it, the live stuff is always going to be the engine that drives everything along. The other stuff, our AP, the IMROs, all that. It's all almost like a welcome bonus because you never really know what it's going to be when it comes in, and it's good and it gets you through. And I'd always use the example, there's a Limerick band, the Hitchers, and they were going for 15 years and they were constantly on the verge of breaking up, and every time they go like, look, fuck it, let's just do one last gig, get this fucking thing over with and do it. And they'd have got plays on BBC Radio 1, a check come in for 500 quid sterling, and they go, fuck it, another 6 months. And it just carried on. And so that's, and now they play once a year at Christmas, but yeah, but it is, it's the live stuff, without a doubt. Moving along.
I don't think I have anything to add to that, really. It's just sort of cut your cloth according to your expectations, because with Lisa Hannigan, we started off with this fantastic band, and now they're touring as a three-piece because we're getting lesser and lesser fees, and obviously the show changes, and that actually challenges the musicians as well. I think it keeps it fresh for them if they tour in a different configuration. Every so often, Lisa will do some solo shows, she'll do some, you know, orchestra shows or whatever, but I think we've been lucky enough to be able to tour financially sustainably in Ireland, and that pays for us to go on tour with Richard Hawley in the UK, which, you know, then we sell some merch, which affords us to go to Europe on tour. So you just got to rob Peter to pay Paul and keep continuing. But I think publishing has been helpful as well. Just getting a publishing advance, which sort of literally maintains things for a little while. So yeah, but it's constant reinvestment.
I mean, there's nothing more I can add to that. It's literally live, and then anything else is a bonus, really.
I mean, I had a conversation recently with a manager of an Irish band. I asked him, they have a record out, the record's been doing really well all year. I thought it was doing really well all year, you know. So I kind of asked him, how many copies of the album you sold? And he kind of looked at me with like two heads. Couldn't tell you. We don't keep tabs of that anymore because that's not the most important part. I remember kind of going away, and even when you're keeping an eye on what's going on, for someone to kind of like boldly kind of state that fact, you're kind of going, geez, you know, that's how much has changed. Any question over there? Gentleman in the front row with the cap. We'll get the microphone to you now. So.
I think also just to add on to that point as well, another small tangent, it's like if you manage a couple of artists, I can't emphasize the importance of keeping cash flow for each individual artist, individual streams separately. I know it's very commonsensical, but I've seen people that I'm just going, really? So.
What was that about robbing Peter?
Sir?
All right, so this is a follow-up on that question. With the increased emphasis on the live touring revenue, do you ever find that your artists get fatigued, that they're, you know, with the increased pressure to keep touring, keep it going, not enough time to write new material, not enough time to, I don't know, do other things?
That's a very good question, but I have a feeling that the answer could be, you know, again, would be manage expectations.
I mean, that it's almost a sort of luxury problem if you're at a place where you're touring sustainably and you can afford to maybe take some time off. Again, it's knowing your artist well enough to be able to plan and strategize for the year ahead and see, you know, and everything does evolve. People change. They decide they want something at the beginning, and then 2 weeks in, they're like, no, that's not what I wanted. So, you know, we're not saving lives. It's always possible to reschedule shows, which you never want to do for the disappointment to your fans or whatever, but we have due diligence to the people we represent, and they're the most important people. So you have to listen to them. You have to do what's right for them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's never been truer. Like, now you have to do the work. And so if you're burnt out, that's totally respectable and understandable, and that means the expectations need to be managed, because there really are no shortcuts. I mean, unless you're a South Korean pop star, but otherwise there's no shortcut.
But I think as well as the expectations, that also being burnt out from touring shows is one thing. Being burnt out from touring shows and going on the piss every night, that's a different thing. That's where the artist has let the other artist down, has let you down. That's the contract. That's the modern contract between the band and the management, is that we all work our hardest on this thing. Yeah, you have little deviations, you have nights off, you have everything else, but if there isn't that, that understanding that everyone works their hardest at it, then there's just no point.
as a flip side to that as well, which is kind of burnout from an audience point of view as well, that, you know, if you look at artists' touring schedules, how many times international art visits Ireland now, it used to be a case you might see an act in Ireland once every 2 years. Now, because of the way things go, you see an artist in January and February, they'll be in for a festival show, they might do a sponsor show as well, they'll come back and do a show before Christmas to pay for their Christmas presents. That's 4 times in 1 year, so there's burnout from an audience point of view as well, so that's another expectation to be managed.
You do have to be careful of that, very much so. I suppose as a manager, you're always trying to consolidate and grow. So you're taking, it's like you do an upstairs in Whelan's and maybe do that twice, and then you go, okay, well, let's try do a downstairs in Whelan's. You do your downstairs in Whelan's a couple of times, that works, then you move somewhere like here. And you're always trying to, ideally what you're hoping to do is play bigger gigs, which means you don't have to do so many gigs, which means that you're not going to be as fatigued. They will have a bit more time to perhaps tour abroad and write and whatever it is. So there's an element of that as well, to where you need to be keeping kind of doing today's gig, but with an eye on 3 gigs later, sort of thing.
Okay. I'm getting a signal to shut up, so I have time for one question from this gentleman there, as long as it's short and snappy.
Hi, I was just wondering, how many times a week would you generally meet with your artists, and what are the main agendas that you think are important to keep on top of on a weekly basis?
That's a really good question, because I live in London, and 2 of the 3 artists I represent within the company are Irish, so I don't see them very often at all, but I'll Skype them, or an email is brilliant for just sort of building that. Or there was a time where I toured all the time, and I don't really like touring so much, so I'll hop in and out to 1 or 2 shows, and I think you become more value then, because you're a bit more, you're in a fresh face. There's more to talk about or whatever, but I think as long as you have telephone, Skype, any sort of contact like that, I don't think you need to see your artist all the time necessarily.
Sometimes your artists may not want to see you either.
You're virtually in constant contact. If unless they're on holiday and you're on holiday, which is rare, you're pretty much which I've done, which is. But it's one of those things where you're almost in daily contact, virtually, whether it's in one shape or a form. So if it gets to the stage where you need to be meeting regularly, I don't know if an actual sit down on a Tuesday, every Tuesday meeting is right, because you'd probably be touring with them. And
I think you could be in for a situation where you're so busy that you never meet them,
I would generally say, when there's a new record, I would literally meet and would sit down with the artist first of all and figure out the whole strategy, and then go meet everybody else. And I don't think meetings face to face are so important. Again, it's probably artist specific. Some people might prefer just to do that.
And it's just about the flow of information, that everybody knows what's going on. So if you're like, well, how are you getting on with the new tracks that you're working on? Well, we're not. But I thought you'd been working on them for the last 3 weeks. Then you've got a problem. Information likewise, and they say, well, are we going on that tour next week? And that tour was cancelled. Then that's when you need to be having set meetings on a Monday. But it should be, it's like having an open CB radio channel 24 hours a day to 2 or 3 people. When you manage a band, they will call you all times, day and night, about the smallest things, about the biggest things, and that's the way I think it has to be for it to be effective.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much to our panelists, to Jeffrey, to Joe, to Bernadette, and to Jim.